How's it going? Welcome back to Dylan Pickup's blog. So today I want to talk about tone, just tone in general. As you know, on the run up to Summer NAMM 2015, I've not been making as many videos because we've been real busy building pickups and guitars, and you know, just trying to focus on that show that's coming in July. But I've been trying to observe, you know, on the internet over the last few weeks, kind of the hot topics and stuff, and kind of see what people are interested in. And I want to just talk about tone in general. This is halfway a tech blog and halfway editorial, because one of the goals, especially here at Dylan Pickups and Nikita Guitars, is we want people to be able to understand, and this is the whole reason why I do this blog in the first place. We want people to understand that tone is attainable for pretty much anybody. One of the biggest things I see in groups on Facebook and on forums is, I'm about to order so-and-so piece of gear. It doesn't matter what it is, it doesn't matter who it's from. It could be pickups, it could be a pedal, it could be an amp, it could be a cable, it could be strings, it could be whatever it is. And it's always, not always, but many times something like, I'm about to order, or I have just ordered, that's my favorite, I have just ordered blank piece of gear. Is it good? And it's almost like the person is asking for some kind of confirmation from somebody else that they've just made a proper choice. And the thing about it is, what is one piece of gear is good for one person is not necessarily good for another. So let's talk about where our definition of tone comes from. First of all, what is great tone? Well, great tone is whatever you think it is. There's thousands of guitars, there's thousands of pedals, there's thousands of amps, you know, whatever it is. And for some reason, the industry over the last 50 years, and this is probably more so since the baby boomer generation actually starts to decline, and the next generation is coming up, that this need for vintage gear and this need for the standard of whatever was set in the 1950s and 1940s to become the standard for what a guitar should sound like. The thing is that there's only a handful of people that have an opportunity to play this vintage gear, and so what everybody else is doing on the internet is trying to emulate something A, they've never heard, or B, they don't really know what it even sounds like, which is kind of the same thing. A and B are kind of the same thing. So let's talk about that for a second. Somebody will say, well, so-and-so rock god, guitar god, has this gear and this rig, and I want to sound like that. And so they will kind of assign all these various variables to it, and they'll say, well, it needs to be this kind of wood, it needs to be this kind of finish, it needs to be this kind of wires, it needs to be this kind of pickups made out of these kind of materials, it needs to be this kind of amp from this kind of year, and I want this tone. And they get it all together and they play it and they're disappointed. Because what works for one person doesn't work for the other. So let's talk about a few of those buzzwords and where tone comes from. First of all, many people have asked me, because of my kind of alternative views on this kind of stuff, and sometimes controversial. We'll handle the big one today. My view on tonewood, and whether it matters to the electric guitar or not. And I'm going to give you the same answer that I give everybody else when they ask me this. The tone of an electric guitar is the sum of all of its parts, and everything makes a difference. And that being said, each small factor does not necessarily make as big of an impact as you may realize, especially when we are completely building a new product from scratch. The tonewood debate, the nitrocellulose versus polyurethane debate, the plain enamel wire on your pickups versus poly debate, the nickel versus chrome on the covers, the ash versus alder in a Telecaster, for instance. All those issues only matter to people, or should only matter. And this is kind of where we're getting to the crux of this issue. When people are trying to duplicate a particular product from a particular time period, or trying to duplicate what they think is a particular tone. Okay? If we are building a guitar completely from scratch, or if we are trying to define our tone as a musician, all those factors, for the most part, can go out the window, and we can go back to fundamentals. And this is what we always need to remember when making choices for our gear, is our fundamentals. What should our fundamentals be? Number one, what we want to sound like. Number two, our playing style. And number three, really ultimately, is our budget, because we can only afford so much. And you could say, well, that's easy for you to say, and easy for anybody that is surrounded by a bunch of boutique gear to say, because they have the baddest stuff ever. But the thing is something that really surprises me on a very regular basis. Yes, I have a bunch of boutique gear because I do dealer sales for Fuchs Audio Technologies, for their pedals and for their amps, and I represent the marketing arm of Nikita Guitars, and I own Dylan pickups, and so I have all this fancy stuff around me. But you know what? I can hand this to another guitar player, and I do this a lot, especially when we're testing new products. I will take my rig and I will put it in the hands of somebody else, and it sounds completely different. The same exact guitar, the same exact pedals, the same amp that I play through every day, it sounds completely different from somebody else. So, the thing is you could come over, whether you started playing guitar yesterday, or whether you've been playing for 20 years, whether you're used to playing on a $200 guitar or a $10,000 guitar, it doesn't matter. You need to sound like you, and you are gonna sound like you. Have you ever heard that story about, and I think it's true, all the verification I've ever done on this story is true, that one of the big guitar magazines wanted to borrow Eddie Van Halen's rig, so they borrowed his rig, they just took it from him, they brought it over there, they shot an article with it, they were going to shoot an article with it, and they're like, hey, it doesn't sound anything like you, and there's something wrong with it. And so he goes over there and he plays, and he's like, no, it's totally fine. It's because Eddie Van Halen sounds like Eddie Van Halen, nobody else does. Brian May only sounds like Brian May, nobody else does. And we spend all this money and all this time and create all this argument and anger, really, on what sounds good versus what doesn't sound good. And the bottom line really is, you really need to make that choice for yourself. And that's what we want to help you do. I don't care what you buy, I don't care where you get it from, I don't care if you get it from me, if you get it from somebody else, but what I really want you to do is think about a couple of things. One is, with the gear that you already have, how much possibility is there? There are very famous players that could play a cheap guitar, a Boss Metal Zone, because that's always the one that gets made fun of, and some cheap transistor amp, and they can sound fantastic. So what potential do you have in your gear that you already own? And think about it, and we'll go back and watch all these videos about setup and setting up your guitar properly, and all those sorts of things with guitars that you already own and gear that you already have, and go rethink everything that you're doing based on what you already have. Look at it with a new mind. Doesn't matter if you have vintage gear, it doesn't matter if you have low-end gear, and low-end gear is a completely ridiculous misnomer. Many people have played guitars that were worth less than $500 and been very, and we are trying to find that tone, and it's a guitar less than $500. So that's something that you really need to think about. And probably this is the biggest one. And people overlook it, and they want to deny it, and they want to make excuses for it. and they want to put gear in the place of it, and they want to get another pedal to fix it, and they want to get a bigger amp to fix it, and they want to be louder to fix it, and they want to get a more expensive guitar to fix it. But the bottom line is, the tone comes from two places. Your hands. That's it. That's it. I can play this gear, or I can go to the store and I can play gear in Guitar Center or in Sam Ash or any other of the major places, or I can go and play the most expensive guitar. I'll give you an example. We talked about people that don't have much opportunity to play this legit vintage gear. Well, I have played it. I've played a Blackguard Telecaster, and I've played a 59 Burst, and I've played 59, you know, any of the Plexi stuff. I've played a 60s ES335. I've played all that fancy stuff, all that expensive stuff. The thing is, it still sounds like me. It doesn't matter. And to tell you the truth, a 59 Burst, I don't like it. The neck's too thick, the guitar's too heavy, the pickups are too bright, and for the music that I play, I can't stand the thing. I don't like it. And the interesting part about this is I have a friend who has one. Well, it's a reissue, but he has one, and he plays it, and it is some of the best guitar tone I've ever heard in my life. It's just amazing. But I can't stand the thing. I wouldn't own one if he gave it to me. I'd sell it. I just don't like it. I don't like it at all. And somebody's going to say, well, that's blasphemy because that was the history of whatever. It doesn't matter. If you want to sound like you, and this is what I get to the most, this is my biggest point, you need to sound like you. If you're playing a cover band and you're trying to catch some tones, yeah, I understand that. But you need to sound like you. And if you want to sound like you, and if you want to define your own tone, then you take all that stuff, you throw it out the window, you go to the gear that you already have, and you say, you know what? Within this gear that I already own, I'm going to try to find some tone here. And because good tone is what sounds good to you. It's not whether it's nitrocellulose finish, or polyurethane finish, or plain enamel wire, or a zero nut or a regular nut, or whatever scale length, or whatever. It doesn't matter. None of our guitar heroes, okay, most of our guitar heroes, none of them said, I'm going to build this tone. They were like, my dad gave me this guitar, and this is what I have, so this is what I played, and they became rock stars, and now we define that as some kind of tone. But they didn't go out and build it. They didn't go out and except for the Brian May. But even Brian May, he picked up some parts of his house, and I think an old table, and made his own parts out of junk, you know, and defined a guitar sound for a generation. You could do the same thing with a $300 guitar, a metal zone pedal, and a solid state amp. You could define a sound for the next generation with that gear. That's the bottom line. It's a mentality. And I'm not saying don't go buy any of this stuff. This is how we all make our living, obviously. But throw all that stuff out the window and take a fresh look at it. That's really what we should do. Take a fresh look at tone, and don't define it by an object. Define it with your ear. That's probably the biggest statement of the entire day. Don't define the tone by the object that you're playing through. Define it with your ear. And if you can't find it, try to play the tone before you buy the tone. Because if you buy it, that doesn't mean you can play it. So try to play the tone with your hands before you go buy the tone with a piece of gear. That's all there is to it. That is my tech/editorial for today, and we're going to have some other tech stuff coming up. So thanks for stopping by, and we'll see you next time.